This is Alfred Hitchcock speaking. In the past, I have given you many kinds of suspense pictures, but this time I would like you to see a different one. The difference lies in the fact that this is a true story, every word of it, and yet it contains elements that are stranger than all the fiction that has gone into many of the thrillers that I've made before.
Welcome to the Shamley Silhouette, yet another analysis of the master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. I am your host, Zach Eastman. We are cruising right along on the Shamley Silhouette, ever getting to our endpoint, which will be coming sometime around August or early September, depending on how time fluctuates in this realm we find ourselves in the year 2020. But we're going to cruise along now. Up to this point on the show, we have managed to talk about Hitchcock with nearly every member of the Real Nerds podcast, our parent show that graciously hosts us on the feed. We've managed to talk to Ryan Frost twice regarding different motives of Hitchcock, whether it's working with Cary Grant or his World War II service. We talked with James about Rebecca. We talked with Henry about Rope and modern impressions of Hitchcock. And we talked with Corinne about The Lady Vanishes. So we've had everybody except for one guy who's just a big old guilty party. His guilt stems from the crime of not watching Hitchcock until this show started. And his punishment is thus that he will be forced to discuss two films that I foisted upon him, I confess, from 1953 and The Wrong Man from 1956, two films that are ridden with the theme of guilt. But he has also told us that prior to anything regarding the Shamley Silhouette, the only other Hitchcock thing that he was aware of in his childhood was the Alfred Hitchcock Presents television show, a show that gives us the Shamley Silhouette namesake. So we're going to discuss two episodes of that show as well, but let's bring him on right now. I bring forth the accused, none other than Real Nerds Podcast's own Bradley Haag.
Hey, yeah, I think you're the one who's making the mistake here.
Yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, it's strange that after all the guests we've had on this show, I finally come across one who didn't grow up under the awe of the master of suspense. I would like to, before we jump into the films here, I'll go by this briefly with you. So up until this show started, you had not watched a Hitchcock film, and in the midst of this show's beginnings, you saw your first two Hitchcock films, which were
North by Northwest and Psycho.
Yes, and but prior to that, no other Hitchcock. I think for contextual sake, if you want to tell the audience what was your cinema diet growing up, and how did that kind of dictate your path into what inspired you or what you would choose to watch?
I grew up on a mainstream diet of movies. I did have my classic film phase in college when I started getting into filmmaking or video making, because my college did video, not film.
Yeah.
So I binged a couple of the classics like Casablanca and Gone with the Wind, and never really found anything that like really motivated me or moved me. Like I respect their place in cinema history, but nothing captured my imagination as much as like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the movie, or Batman '89, or the Back to the Future movies. So basically, yeah. Like and I will say that you shouldn't feel any of the guilt that I foisted upon you in that introduction. It was mainly just because it's so convenient. But it was so heavy.
Yeah, but it's consistent with the themes of the films we'll be talking about. But it's true. Your diet, and it actually shows a lot in your work too of what inspires you and influences you. Brad is a filmmaker out here in Denver, in addition to being a podcaster. And amongst the films he's created are several for the 48 Hour Film Project out here. and also a mini epic called Jean-Claude Van Damme's Damn Van, where Brad used a Funny or Die contest to make a mini epic action 80s to early 90s kind of style action movie. So basically, you're not beholden to the classics like others are. Like Ryan and I worship at the altar of a lot of Golden Age Hollywood, and I know James is also subject to those as well. But so basically what I wanted to do with this episode was not only talk about two films that deserve a discussion on the Shamley Silhouette, but also to give you two films that don't have a lot of hype around it. Because when you saw North by Northwest and Psycho, you weren't as enthralled with them as others. And this is not to put you on any hot spot, and I don't want anybody giving Brad any flack on the internet. It's just that there's a lot of hype around those two films that he saw that can never live up to any expectation unless you're seeing it like the age of 5 or 6.
Yeah, the pop culture has lampooned both those movies so much that there's nothing to really be surprised about, as compared to somebody who watched those in the theater when they came out. So, the awe isn't there. But they're fine films otherwise. They're just not, they're not inspiring me to be a filmmaker.
Yeah. So you're saying that I didn't influence you, Brad? I didn't do anything to tip your brain into the world of cinema?
Actually, I am, now that I've seen 4 Hitchcock movies, I'm starting to see a lot of places where up-and-coming filmmakers tread over Hitchcock. And steal his work, so that is a bit inspiring.
Yeah, it's good to see that these films, you can start seeing the patterns that ripple across the decades and how they managed to influence not just the filmmakers of the new wave of the 70s, but also filmmakers as late as literally this minute. I'm seeing things that are like, if I had done them. And not having watched Hitchcock, if I had just done them, I probably would have been graded as being cliche. Right. Well, because you're basically, it's the phrase "it's been done before," or But I would say that what's funny about cliche and everything is that ultimately they're cliches for a reason. Is because there are tropes that manage to really transcend time, and you can still utilize or find a way to change the game on it. So I'd say that if you did try to do them, if you did your version of them, that you wouldn't fall under that necessary label. But it is very easy to fall into that trap of going well, he's just aping on Hitchcock, or he's just aping on Scorsese, or he's just aping on Tarantino. So and so on and so forth.
Well, my point actually is, not having Hitchcock, I'm not drawing it from anything. I'm just making it up on my own, inherently.
Right.
But, because Hitchcock was there before me, he's doing the same thing, but because he's first to the starting line, he gets credit for being doing something similar, but it's genius. It's transforming the industry.
Yep.
So there's just simple techniques. I'm just that just seems so obvious. Why would anyone be wow, Hitchcock?
Yeah, it's actually, well, it's funny you bring that up. It's because it takes somebody like Hitchcock at the forefront to be well, this is basically a how-to guide for filmmaking. One of the reasons why the Hitchcock Truffaut book is so influential is because it's basically the person who was at the forefront, at the gate, if you will, it basically laying out for Truffaut, look, this is how it's done. This is what you do. And Truffaut adds into that the frame-by-frame dissection of different parts of the films that he discusses with him. So he in a weird way, he's kind of the forefront of cinema professors because he's kind of giving you the basic instruction guide.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, someone would have gotten around to doing it like this. And so sometimes the attribution of genius is just, because you were first.
Yeah.
So
who was on first, Brad? Who was on first? Me. I was. That comedy routine is over now. But
well, congratulations.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was really happy to get both an Abbott and Costello joke in Hitchcock's voice at the same time. It was wonderful for me, and now we're done. But I will say, though, what's interesting is that, if you look, if you talk to Brad about his favorite films, among the ones that he's discussed as an influence or as one of his favorites to watch is Mad Max Fury Road, which came out in 2015. And what I'll point out is that film works on very much Hitchcockian pure cinema method, which is the whole idea of try to tell the story with as little dialogue or dialogue cards as possible, and let the camera speak tell the story itself, which is very prevalent throughout Mad Max Fury Road, because there's maybe 15, 20 lines of dialogue in that movie.
Yeah, I remember the first, the opening night I saw it, it was like a preview show, and just being like, is this the dialogue for this movie? Not only is it scarce, but it's also bizarre. I hadn't settled it. It's like watching a movie based on a Shakespeare play. It takes 20 minutes for me to settle in to the style of how people are talking.
Yeah.
And so that didn't register with me. So this is this is punk, Australian, post-apocalyptic sci-fi, I thought they were just being normal until I realized, this is just the characterization of the world. Got it.
Yeah. And you've talked about it before, but the action sequences in that film are propelling the story as much as any dialogue that you have in that film. So it's a purely it's very much a purely visual movie. There's no there are quotes from that movie, but they are tame in comparison, I'd say, to the imagery that you see on screen. That's what you remember it for primarily.
Yeah. I remember being blown away that the structure of the movie, you go on this journey and then you're like, oh, what can they possibly do for the finale? And then their answer is, we're just going to go back to the beginning and do the whole movie over in a condensed amount of time.
Right.
I'm like, oh my God, that's madness.
Yeah. And it's staged and storyboarded in pre-production like crazy, the same way a Hitchcock movie was back in the era. If you watch the behind-the-scenes featurettes on Fury Road, you notice how much prep went into it, not just for the safety of those stunts and those action sequences, but also just what every frame was going to look like and how that was going to propel the story along. And, whether or not George Miller is working off of Hitchcock as a direct influence, or just the fact that this is a storytelling method that has been tried and true and carries forward, we can bring it right back to Hitchcock with establishing that theory of some of the best films are the ones that don't have to over-explain things to you. But what's funny is that the films that we are going to talk about have a lot of heavy exposition in them, but while at the same time operating on visual moments of pure cinema that I think stand out more than any of the dialogue does in the movie.
I'd never heard that phrase attributed to Hitchcock before. Going through college, it just made sense to me when people said, you should try to tell the story through visuals because it's a visual medium. Yeah, that makes sense. But I didn't know that originated with Hitchcock, so that's interesting.
I'm the OG person to bring that up, Brad. I said it in an interview, and it was badass, and then I swiped that credit for all it was worth. But anyway, we're not going to let Hitchcock abuse you too much on this show, Brad. He only comes out every so often when there's something funny to be noted. But we'll jump into the plots of these films here. We'll start. We're going to start in the year 1953. The film is I Confess, directed by me, credit guy, produced by also me, screenplay by George Tabori and William Archibald, based on the play Nos du Conscious by Paul Anselm, starring Montgomery Clift, Ann Baxter, Carl Malden, Brian Aherne, O.E. Hayes, and Olivia Lagarde. Ovlia. Oh gosh, I'm not going to get her right name. But anyway, music by
abusing his legacy.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm ruining. I'm ruining the legacy of Villette. But anyway, music by Dmitry Tiomkin, cinematography by the legendary Robert Burks, edited by Rudy Furr. produced by Transatlantic Pictures. This is one of the last projects that Transatlantic Pictures does before the company is completely dissolved and Hitchcock goes to work mainly for the major studios, and in that process creates some of the classics that we've known today, and also the ones that Brad was like, meh. Which is not a bad. Which, by the way, please again, nobody give Brad any crap for it, because it's good that we got him into these two films here, because these ones don't have a lot of hype on them outside of, I would want to say, cinema devotee circles. The film, obviously based on the 1902 French play. This is a film that Hitchcock had been trying to get made for 8 fucking years. I went through 12 goddamn writers. I don't understand how long it takes to make a fucking movie about priests. Well, one of the reasons why it would take that long is because this play involves a lot of heavy stuff when it comes to speaking about the church and Catholicism and the actions of a priest, which is a subject that obviously today it's much easier to openly discuss, not only the priesthood but also their transgressions. The script had a lot of elements that were from the original source play that were removed at the insistence of the executives at Warner Brothers so that they did not get a negative reaction, and also primarily because so then that way they didn't get censored by the production code. Filming took place in Quebec from August 21st to October 22nd in 1952. Shot in the Quebec area, utilizing a lot of their churches. They were originally all set to go with the script by George Tabori. When the local diocese objected to the execution of the priest character and rescinded the permission, and Tabori refused to change the script, so Hitchcock said, "Fuck you, I'm getting somebody else to finish it off because I'm making this fucking movie. 8 years, George. I'm not going to let it die for you." As we all know, Hitchcock storyboards this to death, and as we'll see as we kind of talk a little bit briefly about the film, there's a lot of imagery in this film that deals with Catholicism and the religious aspect of stuff. The only thing that Hitchcock couldn't prepare for properly was method acting. Method acting, courtesy of this film star Montgomery Clift. Brad, what is your kind of like knowledge of like acting styles when it comes to this old Hollywood versus the films you see today? Because you've stated to me in the past that you have a preference to one as to the other.
Yeah, I just like I said, obviously a lot of these actors at this time come from a stage background, so they're being asked to, instead of act to the back of the theater, right, act to the size of the frame. Right. So it just feels unnatural sometimes, because they're trying to make that translation. Whereas modern movies, it very much feels like people on screen are having conversations that me and my friends have, you know.
And you have, like, what's interesting about the film, and I'm curious if you noticed it, is how Montgomery Clift is acting more subdued, and if anything, the camera is adding to his performance in the terms of anything grandiose or over the top, because Montgomery Clift comes from the actor studio mentality of the method acting, which was also carried over by Marlon Brando and James Dean. Among his teachers were the director Elia Kazan. So Montgomery Clift is mainly working off of an internalized performance. It's mainly dealing with a lot of internal emotion that you express through subtle emotion, and not necessarily the over-the-topness of many Hollywood films of the era where the performance is bigger and broader. That's not to say all films of the era did that, but when we think of older films, I think we tend to think bigger and broader and a little bit more bombastic.
Yeah, especially sci-fi movies from that era.
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, actually, I'll say Forbidden Planet feels a bit subtle by comparison to other ones. So I will say, I'll ask right before we kind of jump into the beats of the plot here. Watching I Confess, did you have any notion of because there's no expectation of it, was there anything that kind of stuck out to you in terms of just the way this film looks? Because it seems different. Every time I watch it, it seems different from anything of that studio era, like even stuff that Hitchcock has made.
Definitely a lot of contrast in the shots.
Yeah.
Harsh dark, harsh white.
Yeah.
Um,
Very noirish.
but I think a lot of that comes from the production design too, because obviously the priest is wearing like a black robe, and Quebec seems to have a lot of like Gothic architecture.
Yeah, and it's stemming from the local parishes they were able to shoot in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically, and the opening of the film primarily just gives us moments of that architecture, not just of the church, but also of the streets around that city. This film opens up immediately with a murder. Somebody is dead, none other than a shady lawyer named Villette. It looks like it's a robbery, except no money has been taken. And it looks as if a priest is walking away from the scene until the person who's wearing the priest cassock removes it to reveal himself to be none other than a normal person named Otto Keller, played by O.E. Hayes. And he runs back to the church, where he runs into Montgomery Clift's character, Father Michael Logan. And he goes to him, and he confesses to the murder of Villette. So right off the bat, we're dealing with Hitchcock placing the bomb under the table, which is a man confesses to a priest of a murder. Only the priest knows what happened. Except he doesn't. There's another person who knows, which is the wife, who chooses not to speak. But we have him confess the murder to the priest, and by the Catholic belief of confession, he is not allowed to reveal what Otto Keller has confessed. Now, obviously, we're dealing with this in the 1950s. Obviously, things have changed in the Catholic Church's operations. I would have to imagine that type of confession-bound contract would not hold sway at any point in today's legal system whatsoever. And then we just move basically through this plot of Father Michael Logan carrying around this knowledge, and he eventually gets tied into the murder because the shady lawyer knew that he had been seeing somebody that he was in love with prior to becoming a priest. And so the whole film basically becomes a situation of, will he tell the police what he knows from Otto Keller, or will he let himself be framed for this murder in order to hold to his vows? So I guess a big question that I have for you is, watching this film, when you're looking through it, you've seen other films do this kind of, the wrong man or accused of a crime or set up or framed. What does it look like to you from a modern standpoint, watching something like this, where you don't really have an expectation walking into this particular Hitchcock movie?
I guess early on I thought this was kind of going to take place like a whole movie entirely in the confessional booth.
Oh, that would be phone booth, but confessionals.
Yeah. So that's the only expectation I had, was like, that first couple scenes, like, oh, that might be a creative, interesting choice for this era to, have a small scale, like just like a bottle movie, I guess.
Right.
I also started to think, because like one of my favorite recent movies is Doubt.
Yeah.
Which is a
notorious film on this show.
Yeah. Legendary in the Real News podcast. But yeah, there's this. That's more of a mystery. This one, there really isn't a mystery. The only question is, like, is he going to confess and save himself or not? So
yeah, and
the other one's kind of like a whodunit.
Right. And I'm curious as to whether or not, like, so you've already seen two films by Hitchcock where information is placed up front, or you already know the twist, and so the suspense is kind of ruined for you. Looking at it through this particular lens, on at least I confess, did the suspense work for you? Like, did him giving you some stuff up front and then kind of playing it along for that 94 minutes work for you in terms of a modern audience?
Not really. Like I wasn't really anticipating anything. I just kind of, there's that big expositional flashback in the middle where I kind of started to check out a bit of, it just feels like I'm just following the movie. I'm not looking forward to anything.
Yeah. No, it's within it providing that context of their history together. If I have one issue with the movie, as beautiful as the cinematography is in those moments in the flashback, whether it's the angled shot of her coming down the steps for their first embrace, combined with that music, my primary issue with it is the voiceover. If I turned the sound off, I would essentially get the story of their love and also their conflict without that voiceover, or at least maybe trim down that voiceover a ton. But what sticks out in this film, outside of the imagery that he's using within Catholic guilt, he's also dealing with just guilt in general and a frame up and the fear of authority. And this is a theme that Hitchcock uses in all of his films. It stems back to, I don't know if you've heard this story, Brad, but Hitchcock tells a story of when he was a young lad. He did something naughty, and his dad brought him down to the police station. The person who was at the police station put Hitchcock in a jail cell for 5 minutes and said, "This is what we do to naughty boys." Left him in the cell alone for 5 minutes and then just let him out. So talk about traumatic childhood, if the story is true. Talk about traumatic childhood that brings on this fear of authority that is prevalent through his films that then gets adapted down the line into other films where we have a mistrust of authority.
Yeah, that's a bit extreme, but doesn't surprise me from that era, given like domestic abuse.
Yeah,
from that time.
Right.
So
and it's one of those, like, and again, there's a lot of theories as to that story's bullshit or whatever, or it's like a story that he told, but it for the purposes of the Shamley Silhouette, we'll just say it's true, because I've got little Hitch down my back going like, it's fucking true. All my stories are fucking true. But so basically with this film, he's able to not only utilize that sense of guilt and draw it out throughout the film, whether it's through Cliff's reactions to things, the way the world seems to kind of close in on him, especially during the trial. But Cliff also manages to give off a subdued performance that Hitchcock's camera tends to enhance. One moment in particular that stands out within this is Father Logan knows he's about to be arrested, and so he's walking down the halls of the entry to the church, or where they're living, and Otto Keller is walking down with him, going like, "Are you going to tell them? Are you going to tell them? Are you going to tell them?" And then the camera turns to Cliff and moves in on him, basically just holding in his fucking temper, like with that swelled music cue that basically, like, just ultimately suggests the conflict between this style of filmmaking, this style of acting that Hitchcock is looking for, and Montgomery Clift's method acting. I will say that this whole tension between them came to a head. And I don't know if you've dealt with this before, Brad, on a set, but I will paint this picture for you. They're on set. This is near the climax of the film after he has been found not guilty, and he's walking out, and everybody's around him, basically telling him to, go home, like don't be a priest, like take that collar off, and the direction Hitchcock gave was like, okay, you're going to look around for a minute, and then you're going to look at the church, because that's where my camera is going to be in the next shot. And Montgomery Clift is reported to have said, "Well, I don't think my character would look at the church." And, I don't know if you've ever had a situation where an actor's telling you, "I don't know if I'm feeling that." But it's got to be frustrating for Hitchcock, who's gone through this form of filmmaking that he is known for years, and then to suddenly have somebody tell him, "No, that's not what emotionally works," and then just, hand applied directly to forehead, trying to understand why emotionally he wouldn't, because Hitchcock's camera is absolute. So I mean, it seems like it's a situation to me where you are starting to see the birth of what you have said you prefer in a film going experience.
Yeah, obviously, Hitchcock had the added benefit of he was able to pay his actors, so
yeah,
Montgomery Clift would eventually acquiesce.
Yeah,
but I have encountered the whole. I think my character would do this, and because if 48's everyone's there for free, it's kind of like, well, I guess if your character believes that, that's what we should do. So
yeah, there should be there is the addendum of money, like money is honey, as the kids say, yo.
Yeah. So,
but so and the climax of the finale of this film essentially leads to what I think is a rather inventive trick that I'm sure that obviously gets played down the line in other films, not necessarily through the religious aspect, but more through like cop films and detective films, is that Montgomery Clift never gives up the information. He never tells the police what he knows. He draws it out of Keller because Keller just assumes that Montgomery Clift told them everything.
Yeah, he just lets him be his own demise.
Yeah,
although I feel like Montgomery Clift could have gotten him there a lot sooner.
Yeah, what's funny is that the draw out of the information with the whole context of him and Ann Baxter's relationship is a situation that is meant to, and I think succeeds at adding depth and dimension to not just him as a character, but also his guilt. But there also is an expediency of like, man, it seems like this goes on longer than it should. I will say that one of my favorite performances in this film is by Carl Malden as the detective, because Inspector LaRue is one of those persistent people in a Hitchcock movie that you, in retrospect, find extremely frustrating because he always finds an angle. Like what's amazing of it is like, so that whole exposition scene happens that you were talking about, and it all ends, they all go away, it's assumed everything is cleared up, and Carl Malden has to bring up, well, anything can happen between 11 and 11:30. Which is, to me, like one of those things of just like, we probably could have gotten to this sooner, but I'm going to fly with it because I'm getting more of the added dimension to Clift's character in a way that I don't see in a lot of Hitchcock movies where, the closest I think would probably be Spellbound. But this movie, amongst everything, there's the things that were taken out, and I find this eternally fascinating what a church would find disgusting and what they wouldn't. And amongst them was that the priest and his lover, played by Ann Baxter in the movie, in the original play, they had an illegitimate child, and the priest was executed at the end of the original script for this film. So I don't think you'd ever in your life ever see that come to fruition in the 50s. They would not allow it. Obviously, today, with something like Doubt, especially, you bringing that up is very poignant because that film talks a lot about the current problem with the Catholic Church in a way that this film is obviously heretofore ignorant of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, this, so I guess to sum up, I Confess for You, what is your main takeaway from something like this? It's like a slick 94 minutes. It doesn't have an expectation hanging over its head. What would you give it as a rating compared to, say, what you've already experienced with Hitchcock thus far?
I guess a 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5. So a little bit more above.
No, about the same as like North by Northwest or Psycho.
Okay.
Maybe a 2.5.
2.5. So you just immediately.
Now that I think about it, like, well, my scale is like, Ninja Turtles is a 5.
Right.
So, yeah, North by Northwest at least has, like, in Psycho are, mainstream classics. So, if I give those a 3, this one's This is like an extended episode of any other story
Right.
in entertainment that I've seen. You know.
Is it? I will ask you. The big one I'll ask is that did you feel like there's a bit of a difference between some of the more older films that you were exposed to in terms of the acting style? Like, were you seeing that difference with Montgomery Clift?
Yeah, Montgomery Clift obviously felt more like a real person.
Yeah.
Even though he was frustrating, because, like I said, he could have been more motivated to solve his problems faster.
Right.
But it just feels like he's drawing everything out because he has to get to a hour and a half long runtime.
Yeah. I mean, the motivation that I would draw that to, because I'll say up front, I really like this film within the scheme of the whole Hitchcock discussion we've been having, because it's a film that gets to draw upon Hitchcock's themes of guilt that he strews about all of his films, but also kind of dealing with the Catholicism element of it, which is something that he doesn't always shove down your throat in other moments in his films. He has Christian symbology in it, but he's not using it to motivate the story. And I found it interesting to see like what Hitchcock would do under the auspices of like, I'm telling a religious story, which has a taboo element to it. And as far as the motivations of it, I think what's interesting about this film and the one we're going to talk about next is that it's basically a character piece. It's not even it doesn't have the same kind of story scale of a North by Northwest or a Psycho. Even like Psycho, for how intimate it is with its characters, it's still kind of big. Like bigger things are happening. This one's very small scale, very quiet.
This would be easily translated into like a modern low budget indie film.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and Doubt's not a indie film. It was a Miramax production at the time, but it's still smaller compared to the films that were coming out at that time too.
It feels very much like a play.
Yeah.
That you're watching, just more 3-dimensional.
Yeah. The difference being obviously that you can kind of jump around with that camera and do a lot more visually interesting techniques with it.
Yeah, as you should if you're going to translate a play to film, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that and we've talked about this on Dial In for Murder as well, but Hitchcock, whenever he's adapted a play, I think he's been very, very good at finding a way to draw the audience in visually. In the case with Rope, it's the shot, it's the one take motif of like, this is all going to look like a continuous take. It's not going to, basically the Birdman or the 1917 method that we've seen within the past 5-6 years. And with this one, I think it's mainly he's making a noir film out of a religious, with religious elements to it, in a way that not other noir films are going to do of the era.
Like this too feels like a play that's been translated into a film. So
yeah,
like I could very much just see this playing out on a stage, and then as Hitchcock does a few things to make it more cinematic. So
yeah, and I think he's able to kind of what Carpenter ends up doing down the line. He creates scale out of that intimacy, because even when you have those crowds or that final scene, like it does feel bigger than you're expecting it to. Like I think if anything, your expectation is for this to be much more quiet, and when it gets loud, it gets loud. Like it doesn't.
Yeah, it really opens up when he like leaves the courthouse and enters the crowd, and
the momentum picks up at that point, and there's just a lot of it's funny is that I think with that final scene, outside of Keller confessing to the crime, a lot of it is primarily on a visual scale, and the shots are very precise, especially when Keller murders his wife. Obviously, like it's one of my favorite things Hitchcock does is like if he wants to implicate that a gun's about to go off, he'll put the camera right on the gun, even though you're not going to see it actually go off because of the era and the technology involved. You're still kind of like you're communicating the intent without having to show a bullet hitting her in the stomach or anything like that.
Right.
So in a sense, obviously it's done to cover people's asses, because production code, there's people I fucking hate. But also, it's a style that he used in silent cinema and carried over, and we still use that today, more or less, if we're trying to like cover up a certain action or something like that, or if we just want to be stylistic with things. But anyway, though this film. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Before you move on, I'm trying to like, because I watched this movie and the other one like really close together. I'm trying to. I have one of the detectives. I think it was Carl Malden from this one.
Yeah.
Did he give you vibes of Christoph Waltz in Inglourious Bastards?
Yeah.
Like there's a scene where he's behind this desk and I think he's interrogating Montgomery Clift.
Yeah.
Or Henry Fonda. Like I said, there's very similar scenes in these movies.
No, it would be Montgomery Clift. Yeah.
But he had like this. So if it was Carl Malden that I'm remembering, he had like the same rhythms as Hans Landa in Inglourious Bastards. I was like, wow, it's so spot on. I wonder if Christoph Waltz stole from that.
You know, it's funny you bring that up, because when I was watching the film again today, that scene especially where when he's interrogating Montgomery Clift at the beginning and kind of going like, well, in my line of work, I have to be able to jump from moment to moment and whatnot. It felt like a Tarantino monologue by one of his characters that Waltz would have played. It's not.
He even does these like hand gestures where he taps the desk with his finger, like connecting the story. And I was like, God, that's straight out of Inglourious Bastards.
This is how I learned. I watched nothing but this movie, Brad. Like Quentin just came up to me and said, "Watch this, watch nothing else but this." But no, it's funny that like that particular kind of it's not that Malden's flamboyant, but he has definition to him. Whereas otherwise he would just be like some kind of regular, no-face, could give a shit cop. And instead he has a character behind him. Like Hitchcock and the writers are clear to give him something distinctive to do. Because Malden's a terrific actor, and he plays that scene in particular like a champ. Because he's basically laying into like, look, Father, I know this might all be malarkey, but all these things aren't adding up. And so, and it obviously adds to the suspense of like, well, does Montgomery Clift even have a clear way out of this, even though we already know what we know? So I think that kind of acting coming from Malden, who also kind of, worked his way around being more subtle than others of his generation, I think he definitely inspires somebody like a Christoph Waltz to kind of be able to take on that mantle of charismatic, can be kind of like characteristic-driven detective, which is something obviously we've seen flourished in not just his performances, but also in stuff like Daniel Craig in Knives Out, where he has very particular mannerisms and gestures that he utilizes in that movie as well.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So, but this film wraps, so this is funny that I'll bring this up before we go into the reviews. Hitchcock was aware that non-Catholics might have shaken their heads going like, well, why wouldn't he just expose Keller automatically? Why wouldn't he just go to the police? And this is the question you were bringing up. And Hitchcock said this, and I think this directly ties to his Jesuit upbringing. He said, "We Catholics know that a priest cannot disclose the secret of the confessional, but the Protestants, the atheists, and the agnostics all say, 'Ridiculous, no man would remain silent and sacrifice his life for such a thing.'" So, I think the answer to your question, Brad, is because since he's dealing specifically with Catholicism, he is essentially pointing out the irrelevance of a dogmatic law, and so that's kind of the motivation of everything. If this was literally just any kind of other church, the bishop or the pastor would go immediately to the police. Obviously, the way we view that integrity today is of multiple question and under discretion to the hugest degree, but. So I think that's Hitchcock's explanation to you. I don't know if it holds water with you, but
yeah, I guess like it's his movie. He can orchestrate it however he wants. But
damn right, I will.
it doesn't change the fact that I'm sitting there going like, well, yeah, he can't, betray his beliefs, but he could still set the guy up so that he incriminates himself. Like,
right.
Half the time he's just hanging back painting or
Yeah.
you know, not engaging with him at all, and it's just like making his life worse.
Right.
And that guy was such a creep anyway. Like,
it should be pointed out, you know, he is a refugee who was given a shelter by the church and given things to do to help the church. And he is also, the reason he killed Keller was because he was trying to grab the money that would set him and his wife up with a new life. And so I think that
later on in the movie, he kills his wife. So it's just like, you know, I don't feel sorry for him. Like, it's never really been about taking care of both of them. It's always been about taking care of himself. So I'm just like, yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah, and his paranoia has also driven him to the point where he would do that. So any actual love he has for his wife left has been consumed by the paranoia that he's feeling, which is, again, another Hitchcock trope. He deals with paranoia. Obviously, you saw it in North by Northwest with Cary Grant's entire character.
Yeah.
But so we'll jump into these reviews here. This film comes out. It gets pretty panned. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times, my favorite critic to chomp on a little bit in terms of his ability to be pithy and at times stupid. Brad, you'll be happy to know that the critic of the New York Times completely agreed with you. He said it was obviously padded and nigh suspenseless script, explaining that the only most credulous patron will be worried for very long that the hero will not be delivered from his dilemma by some saving grace. And this realization well underburdens the situation of any real suspense. Now, he concludes it by saying Hitchcock does manage to inject little glints of imagery and invent little twists of construction that give the film the smooth, neat glitter of his style. Shot on location in Quebec, it has certain atmospheric flavor too, but it never gets up and goes places. It just ambles and drones along. Now, my question for you is, that a little too harsh?
I don't think it's harsh. I think it's just naturally critical.
Yeah.
it's a pretty looking film, but yeah, it's a concept that's really kind of drawn out.
Yeah.
Longer than it needs to be. So.
Yeah. There were a few people who were more on the side of what modern film buffs like about it today. The Los Angeles Times' Philip K. Screwer declared that Hitchcock had fashioned an absorbing screen drama, one of the solidest and most expertly made of recent weeks, because they were getting movies weekly at that time. Remember when we used to get movies weekly, guys? And in his careful treatment, Hitchcock has gone deeper into human relationships than is usual with him, relying less on the physical chase or on theatrical props like trains and merry-go-rounds than on the interplay of faith and doubt to create his famous brand of suspense. So I think what the takeaway from this is that, you know, Hitchcock, as was stated up front, made a much more intimate film, which is probably why I enjoy it a lot more than others might, because it's specifically designed to not be too extravagant, which kind of goes against Hitchcock's motif of trying to cater to the audience or create movies that the audiences of the time are going to thrill and want to go back to and give them an experience. In this one, he's giving them a human experience, and it might feel a little too self-important or pious of him to do it. It was a favorite among the French New Wave filmmakers and people like Peter Bogdanovich, Martin Scorsese, and it has been described by film critic Sarah Ortiz as the most Catholic film of Hitchcock's films, obviously because of it being about a Catholic priest, but also because of the way it's dealing with that guilt and that dogmatic law of confession. So that's basically it for I Confess, and we'll move right into the next film. So a few years go by. Hitchcock travels along the studio realm. He makes films like Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, The Man Who Knew Too Much, the remake, and he lands upon none other than The Wrong Man. Now, let me ask you, Brad, did you think this was going to be based on a true story at all?
No.
No.
It is not.
The story is based around the life of Christopher Emmanuel Bellistrano, and it was also based on a magazine article called "A Case of Identity," and the film essentially covers this real story for beat for beat. The essential story of The Wrong Man is a man who is falsely identified for a holdup and is put through the rigors of the justice system and attempts to clear his name. The film is from 1936. It's described as a docudrama, which I think is
36.
What was that? 1956. Yes.
Oh, I thought you said 36.
No, 1956. No. We're not using your DeLorean to go back in time, Brad. Yeah, I should say we're recording this over Zoom, so obviously there might be a little hiccup in there, but we'll get it cleared. But so it's from 1956, directed by me. It stars Henry Fonda and Vera Miles, with a supporting cast that includes, amongst other people, Anthony Quayle, Harold J. Stone, Charles Cooper, John Hildebrand, Esther Miniclotti, Doreen Lang, Lorinda Barrett, Norma Connolly, Nirima Persuf, Lola D'Anzunio, Werner Klempler, Kippy Campbell, Robert Essen, and Richard Robbins. And there are also some cameos in this film by people who would go on to be bigger names, not the least of which David Kelly, Tuesday Weld, Patricia Morrow, Bonnie Franklin, Barney Martin, and none other than the man who saw the Hulk naked in the Avengers, Harry Dean Stanton. So kind of a loaded cast for this docudrama. Henry Fonda, a legendary actor of the golden age of Hollywood. This is the only time he would work with Hitchcock, and it's a shame because I think he works really well with Hitchcock. So I will say that we don't have to go beat by beat for this film, but I want to point out, and I wanted to know what your impression of this was, Brad, because it's funny that I gave you technically 3 things that have an introduction by Hitchcock. The beginning of this film, we open up on not the silhouette, but the shadow of Hitchcock, explaining to the audience, this is a true fucking story. So there's not... He's basically setting you up for, like, in all my years, I have never told you a story that could even be in the realm of possibility, but this one is some fucking for real shit. What was your impression of that, the director just coming out and doing that? Because obviously, when we have a film today, we generally get, like, a based on a true story, or in the case of Spike Lee's Black Klansman, my favorite version of it, which is film is based on some for real shit. Like, what was your impression of seeing that happen at the beginning of this movie that you had no idea what was about?
I mean, for him, it seemed totally normal to me because of the TV show. So I'm like, oh, that must be something he does in his other movies. So why would I question it? And then they have that explainer card right after it. So I'm like, it's really just... It feels like a way to just get him in the movie because he doesn't want to make an appearance later because the movie's too real.
Yeah. It's this was the only time he would even speak in one of his movies. He never had dialogue with his cameos prior to this film. And so this is not a cameo so much as just like an introduction, because he doesn't... My guess is that he doesn't want to insert himself into the proceedings and break from the reality, because the goal of this film is essentially to create a form of realism. And so by announcing that the story is true, he removes himself from the fantasy of his of any of his other films, where something like a Psycho, where he could pop up in a cowboy hat, or he could be walking his dogs and the birds. This film was actually shot a lot of around Jackson Heights, and filming around New York City at that time had to be very interesting, because obviously the city doesn't even not look like what it looked like then today, but it certainly looks different compared to what it would look like in the 70s with something like Taxi Driver. So it's interesting that he did a lot more of this on location to really create the realism behind the whole film. But, you know, there's a lot of notes that I had going through this film again and really breaking it down. I guess to kind of jump through the plot a little bit, Henry Fonda playing our lead character of Christopher. He's a musician in a nightclub. He's basically living paycheck to paycheck. His wife needs $300 for dental work, and his wife, played by Veer Miles, plays Rose. He goes to a life insurance firm to try to borrow on her policy, and that's when other people in the firm suspect him of being a person who held one of their clerks up months ago. And one thing leads to another. He gets picked up based on the suspicion that he is the guy. The cops take him on a whirlwind that includes him going store by store and having the clerks identify him. He writes a note, like through the case of bad luck, in the same handwriting form and to the letter of the person who handed a note to the people he was robbing. So they get him on handwriting and basically detail. And through the film, Hitchcock is essentially kind of encapsulating you into the fear of being falsely imprisoned, which is a theme we certainly not only experience today cinematically, but also in real life, with obviously with the different things that have been happening within the world that we live in now today. Whether it's, police, fudging documents and stuff like that. But I will say that I was curious what you thought in terms of the how this would, say, hold up to any other film that kind of goes through the wrong man on the wrong side of the law and trying to prove his innocence. Because this is not too dissimilar from other films you've seen, not only just through the course of Real Nerds podcast, but also that you've seen in general.
Yeah, I feel like this subject has been tackled so much in like blockbusters now that this is almost starkly different. I think my big takeaway watching it was just like I kept noticing how meticulous it was about portraying, like, there's so much time spent on quietness and just feeling like the audience needs to feel like what Henry Fonda's going through.
Yeah.
Like whole scenes just to show you, or to like make you feel as an audience that he's being abused and betrayed by the system.
Yeah.
Because the story is not that deep. It's like a lot of the movie is just you're seeing scenes of what happens in detail when something like this occurs. So
right. Which I would have to assume, based off of Hitchcock's fear of the police and the stories that he's told over the past, obviously this is an attempt to realize that fear point for point, like basically beat by beat. And you're right, like the majority of this film, when it's not going into more of the expositional forms of the script written by Maxwell Anderson and Angus MacPhail, it's primarily utilizing the music and the imagery to give you the feeling of you are in Henry Fonda's shoes. And he actually does this a lot in the... Literally,
like there's that whole scene on the bus where it just keeps cutting back to shoes.
Yeah. He gives you a lot of POV, which is another Hitchcock stock and trade that he didn't obviously birth that, but he uses it primarily in his films because he wants to put you in the voyeur seat. And it's particularly with this film, he manages to create the illusion of what it's like to kind of go through that whirlwind. The most obvious of the shots by Robert Burks being when he's in the jail cell and the camera starts spinning in a circle and kind of just going around and around and around to indicate that dizziness.
Yeah, that's another like film schooly thing that I kind of scoffed at, of like, yeah, this probably seemed really cool in 56, but if someone in film school did that today, it would be like, oh God, come on, dude.
Yeah, right.
Don't be so literal.
You have to understand, Brad. All you'll have to understand is that at the time, this was our version of that Avatar shit. Like, this was bigger than 3D. It was just Robert Burks swinging that camera around.
Yeah.
But what's funny is that for all the imagery that he does that may not hold up today in terms of that kind of shot process, there's a lot that still works. Like when he's in those prisons, he's going low angles. He's flat out giving you the impression of being sunk into the madness of not just prison, but also him feeling his innocence and being overburdened by other people's assumption of guilt. And the movie, it's funny, it turns into a detective movie in the middle of the film, where him and his wife Rose basically go on a detective story to find their alibi, and it only happens for like a good 20 minutes, because what we really get from Vera Miles's character is that she's driven mad by the fact that no one believes her husband is going through this, all leading to a confrontation between those two after he's been put out on bail and trying to find his alibis, where she is driven completely insane. And I think another part of what Hitchcock is working towards in this is to also examine the lives that are affected by mistaken identities like this, or the miscarriages of justice, and seeing the different victims of this circumstance, because it's not just the person in the cell, it's also the people around him.
Can we talk about Henry Fonda and Vera Miles for a second?
Yes, we
as
can.
A couple.
Yeah.
So first thing, before the movie started, I haven't seen a lot of Henry Fonda movies, so initially I thought that was Peter O'Toole.
You know what's funny? When I looked at Henry Fonda in this movie, I didn't think Peter O'Toole. I was just like, oh my God, Willem Dafoe is like a Buddhist monk who just travels from life to life.
And then the second thing was,
he has that jawline that kind of looks like Willem Dafoe.
Yeah. And then the second thing was, like, I think maybe 10 minutes in the movie, I started going, he seems like his face is really old. So I looked up his, date of birth and everything, and he was 51 in that movie.
Yeah.
And Vera Miles is 27.
Yes. Yeah. This is
so.
When you bring
that up, it's a bizarre
Bill,
casting choice.
So Vera Miles' story, in terms of being in this movie, but also relating to Hitchcock. She started off her career under contract to Warner Brothers, and she signed a 5-year personal contract with Hitchcock in 1957 after being in The Wrong Man, and was kind of poised to essentially be his next star project, where this is part of Hitchcock's both legacy and his dishonor, is his obsession with creating the perfect woman. Vera Miles was among those who were in that wheelhouse, and she was initially considered a successor to Grace Kelly in this wheelhouse that he dealt with. And 2 years prior, she was put into an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents that we'll be talking about. But her big thing is she's working through the star system like a lot of starlets did at that era, where they start off young and they always cast them alongside older actors who are more familiar. And the age gap in casting in Hollywood is something that hasn't gone away to this day. Like, Johnny Depp's in his 50s, and they'll still put him up against a younger actress. So it definitely is a stark contrast to be like, these two are married and have 2 children, but it's not uncommon, unfortunately. In the film that you watched, the first Hitchcock film you watched, North by Northwest, the woman who's playing Cary Grant's mother is roughly around his age. So that's completely unfair, obviously. Actually, it's good to point out with Vera Miles, since we're talking about her, as discussed with the Vertigo episode with Will Elder, she was supposed to play the lead that eventually went to Kid Novak in Vertigo, but she got pregnant, and Hitchcock, being rather upset, couldn't use her, so he used Kim Novak instead. He basically kept her under contract by not giving her really much work until Lila Crane in Psycho, which would be her fulfillment of the contract. She was a woman who held her own against Hitchcock's star-making vehicle. She just wouldn't put up with it in a way that, unfortunately, Tippi Hedren had to endure a lot more of, to the mental anguish of both of them. But, I would say that when it comes to Vera Miles' performance in this film, despite the age gap and the difference and whatnot, I do believe their chemistry. Like, it's not unfounded. Like, Henry Fonda is very good at making you like him, and that kind of seeps into his relationship with Vera Miles. Like, their opening banter when they're discussing the dentist bill, it's believable. It's not unfounded.
I mean, some of the dialogue is kind of like odd, but like
right.
I always felt like Henry Fonda, like I believed, like what he was going through, and then Vera Miles, I thought she did really well with what she had to do. Like, she definitely felt natural in that movie.
Yeah,
for someone who was losing their mind.
Right, and what's interesting is that she's
except for that one part in the stairwell where I was like, "What did she even just say? Like, is she laughing or is she?"
She's losing her. Well, because she's had it because two of their alibis are dead, so she's just like the ironic laugh of just like, well, whoop-de-fucking-do, we're fucked, like, and that kind of laugh, like
but yeah, I couldnn't tell if it was like a genuine. Like, is this a comedy moment, or is she...
No. Is
she actually distressed? Yeah. That's the only part where I was like, that's a weird choice.
No, if anything, it's meant to encapsulate the fact that she's being driven insane by not just what her husbands have to go through, but what now she has to go through in order to prove that her husband's innocent. She didn't think that it would be this hard. And... obviously, the toll that it takes on not just that situation, but also the family life, and the spoiler for the ending is that the real burglar is eventually apprehended, through actually, I will say, one of my favorite silly cop moments in Hitchcock history, because it's beautifully constructed for the time, but also in an eternal method, where. The real burglar is caught, played by a guy who looks like he's on his way to meet the other alien from Men in Black to discuss the Orion's belt. But he's caught. He's brought to the police station. Henry Fonda gets a call saying, "Hey, we got the real guy." He's fingered by the women who were earlier accusing Henry Fonda of the deed, and he walks out. And they walk side by side, and he says, "You know what you've done to my wife." But prior to all this wonderful setup of execution of like these two people who have inadvertently crisscrossed in each other's lives, when the real burglar is brought in, the cop who arrested and was so convinced of Henry Fonda's guilt walks past him, not even giving it a look. And then he walks outside and he gives the double take. And it's the double take of, it was my riff brain went into my riff tracks brain went into mode, and I was like, duh? Like, he's like suddenly just figuring it out. Like, oh, wait a second. That looks like the guy we've been after. But the consequences of this whole case of a mistaken identity is that Rose has become mentally scarred. The last scene of this movie is Henry Fonda meeting her inside the mental institution where she's been put to, try to recover from all this. And the impression is given that she will not recover from this. And the key thing to take away from this is that, one, Vera Miles blowing it out of the water in this scene, because she's basically so despondent that she's internalizing a lot of that mental anguish and providing a portrayal of exhaustion, which I haven't seen in a Hitchcock movie as we've gone through this series, in terms of like what that mental anguish of going through a movie like this puts you through. Because not even in Psycho, when she's learning everything about her sister's demise in that movie, does she give this kind of performance. But then the film cuts to a title card that says that Rose was eventually cured, and that they lived happily ever after in Florida. The reality is that Rose never fully recovered, and she blamed herself for her husband's arrest for the rest of her life. Despite everything that happened and him being acquitted, she still blamed herself for it. And the real Chris Balestrero sued the city for false arrest, asking for $500,000. He settled on a settlement of just $7,000. And he earned $22,000 from the film, which went to repaying the loans for Rose's cure. So this film helped in a weird way to get Rose some medical care. But just looking at the whole process of this being a real story and the cost that the justice system at that time and still to this day has on people who are falsely accused of, especially these are low-income people. We're not talking about like they were like upper-class socialites in New York. They're arguing about a $300 dentist bill and how to pay for it in the beginning of this movie, which I'd argue is relevant to what we deal with in healthcare in this country today.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So this film, it was the final film that he did for Warner Brothers, incidentally, and it completed a contract commitment that he had done with 2 films for Transatlantic Pictures that were released by Warner's. And after The Wrong Man, Hitchcock goes back to Paramount, where he fulfills the remainder of that contract with a film called Psycho and basically gets filthy stinking rich off of it. Within the reviews of this film for The Wrong Man, they were mixed to negative as well. Critics found that the realism was not convincing, and that the suspense was not in the realm that Hitchcock was known for. The key review that I found that that kind of pointed out like some of the more negative aspects of the film by Philip K. Schreer of the Los Angeles Times, who we talked about earlier for I Confess. He said, as drama, unhappily, it proves again that life can be more interminable than fiction. So I think I feel like that people were dismayed by this film because Hitchcock is not giving them the flight of fancy that he's been known to give them. And so there's an expectation of this film that doesn't hold up to anybody's standards. I'll ask you, Brad, now that we've talked about both of these movies, which one would you prefer over the other if you had to, pick one?
That's tough.
Or I guess, which one would you want to rewatch again if you were like in a bind where you needed to watch something and only these 2 things were available?
Tied to a chair, gun to my head, family's lives at stake.
Look. You've got 2 fucking choices. I Confess or The Wrong Man. Fucking tell me.
Probably The Wrong Man, because it's more of an experiential movie.
Yeah.
Again, this is another movie that you could easily remake as like an indie film. It's the Chez Artiste like remake today. But it has a similar vibe of like a lot of indie filmmakers today, where you're kind of just experiencing, like there's not a lot of dialogue and you're just experiencing someone going through something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that this one has more of a parallel to modern cinema than I Confess does, where I Confess is, I think, more suited to a play.
Yeah.
And you could convey the same story without the cinematic equivalent, whereas this is very much like it helps to see what's going on rather than tell it.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of modern day filmmakers would agree with you, because like Martin Scorsese has pointed out to this film, like not just how it's influenced him within the realm of dealing with the Catholic, the Catholic elements of guilt and searching for answers. But he also he's described in more than one documentary about the certain scenes with him in the prison and alluding to the different Catholic symbology within it and the transference of guilt, and how that, obviously is a trope that is strewn about Hitchcock's films. And in this film in particular, it is the ultimate transference of guilt. Like, as we discussed with Rear Window, where it's like the ultimate Hitchcock film in terms of his technique, The Wrong Man is the purest film in terms of the themes that he's the most obsessed with. For all the films that he's made that have been labeled as classics or the ones that we go to, The Wrong Man, I think, is an under-discussed one when it comes to the purest theme of Hitchcock, which is innocent man accused of a crime, which is something that permeates through a lot of his films. Even in something like North by Northwest, it's still so fantastical and big and bombastic that it's not it's not committing an intimization of the theme of guilt or transference of guilt that Hitchcock puts into this particular film. And I think Henry Fonda perfectly portrays a person who is, being put through a ringer, which you're right. Today, when we talk about independent films of the era of maybe like from the 90s all the way up to today, a lot of those films deal with experience and not so much plot-based material. Like, Fruitvale Station is a good example, directed by Ryan Coogler, of a person going through his day. We experience his life, and then by the time we get to the end of that person's life, it makes what's happened to him seem you realize that it's so unjustified and horrible because of what we've seen him go through the day in just his typical day. And in the case of The Wrong Man, we have a film where you are shown what happens not just at the end of that system, but also what are the emotions that go through it. And I think there is exposition in this film, but the primary experience of him is mainly told through the camera and not through any dialogue. You could turn the sound off through 60% of this film. It would make complete sense in terms of watching a silent film,
And his story is more relatable to audiences. Like, he's a dad. He's, lower middle class, whereas the other one, it's the story of a priest, which not many people are, and like what he has to go through by not revealing information. That's a story that's not as you can't connect with as much as this everyman who, also given the times we're in now, where the police aren't as trusted as they used to be.
Right.
And I thought the movie was actually going to go in the direction of like the police were setting him up.
Right.
They were involved in something. So that's where my head went first.
It's weird because the detectives and the way they speak to him give that information. Yeah. Like it does feel to a certain extent like they're just looking for anybody to pin the crime on, like not to just the way they act in those opening scenes reminds me of some of the rhetoric used by people during the West Memphis 3 trials and that were shown in the documentaries Paradise Lost, where they're just looking for somebody to pin this on, and this guy fits the description.
Yeah, the whole scene with the handwriting, I felt like, if Henry Fonda's character wasn't paying attention, the detective could easily be swapping out, oh yeah, this was the first sheet, and this is the second sheet, and this is the third sheet, even though those aren't,
right.
He could easily change the order if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And say like, this guy's, the handwriting we're trying to match is yours because, I'm showing you both of your own writing again. Right.
And it's what makes this film stand out to me in that, with that detail that you mentioned. So prior to this, you can have films about crooked cops or cops who are a little too aggressive with interrogation, but they generally have to even it out with, well, the good guys have to win, so the cops are the good guys. This is a film, I feel like the Wrong Man is one of the first films amongst like the new, at least within the emergence of 50s cinema, that really addresses the reality of the paranoia and the fear that one feels when in a police station, and in the process, based on what he's going through, whether it's the handwriting or talking about the alibis or being ID'd by people, without pushing anybody's moral buttons with the production code, he's alluding to feelings and emotions that then get explained further and elaborated on further in other films that we see where the cops are clearly mistrustful. So obviously, even if it's not intentional, Hitchcock is primarily sticking you in the mode of like, don't trust authority, which is, one of his motifs is that this fear of authority, if not complete mistrust. And this is another pure example of a theme of his being basically handed to you on a silver platter and saying, here, fucking eat this. And so the recent assessments of this film are much more positive than they were of the era. People across the board love this film, and it's one of those films that is like people believe should be in the AFI Top 100. It's a film that I think people should be much more aware of, and yet it and our earlier film are ones that are relegated to the archive collection on Blu-ray. When I don't know if you were noticing it with watching the copies that I gave you on DVD, Brad, but these prints are not in the best conditions by any stretch, because there's still some kind of jumping around and lost pieces of frames within the proceedings.
Yeah, it seems like they were taken off of VHS because the movies each ended with the FBI warning that was very much not remastered. So,
right, which are ones that they used at the tail end of early Warner Brothers DVDs. The Wrong Man in particular has a lot of jumps in its cuts, which I find very sad, because I'm sure that they are able to kind of remaster that a little bit better. So, I mean, here's hoping we get some more elaborate attention to detail with Hitchcock's Warner Brothers films, because there's a lot of classics in there, not as many as the Universal ones, but there's a lot in there. So we'll move right along, though, by going a year back for the discussion of, we've talked a lot about guilt and Catholicism and themes of mistrusting authority. But if there's one thing you can trust, Brad, and I think you'd agree with me, it's when a host on a television show talks directly to you and he makes you feel like you're part of things. And that was what Alfred Hitchcock did in none other than Alfred Hitchcock Presents, an anthology series created, hosted, and produced by Alfred Hitchcock that aired between 1955 and 1965. Amongst the creative teams behind this are producers Joan Harrison and Norman Lloyd, who have been talked about to death on this show. Joan Harrison was Hitchcock's assistant in the earlier years and rose through the ranks to produce not only her own stuff without Hitchcock, worked with Hitchcock on many of his classic films, but then ended up becoming basically the big spearhead of this show. And Norman Lloyd, who was an actor in Hitchcock films prior to this and then took on a much more producerial role within the show. The show consisted of 30-minute episodes within the first run of the series, the first 7 seasons, and then moved to an hour for the final 2 seasons. The original networks it was on were CBS up till 1964, and in between that, Hitchcock did the show for NBC in 1960 to 1962, and then 64 to 65. So he bounced around the different ones. But so within the scope of Alfred Hitchcock, you had said to me prior to me getting you on for this episode that your experience with Hitchcock, if anywhere, began with the reruns of this show on Nick at Night. But it seems like that's been far and away, like you wouldn't really remember any specific details of anything, right?
Yeah, no, I mostly remember I think when they initially premiered it on Nick at Night, they had some like contests where you had to call, like you had to guess how many deaths there were throughout the run of the series.
Oh,
and then like Wink Martindale did the station bumpers, and it was kind of like a telethon type thing.
Oh my God, Brad, we should have done that when the show was airing. That would have been so cool. Get all the kids involved. Be like, hey kids, get out a pencil and notice all the little Easter eggs inside our episode. And if you guess them all, you win a prize. You'll be murdered in the next episode. That would have been a fun contest for kids. Contests were big in those days. You could do that.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, other than that, the most memorable thing is just the opening and closing bookends of the show with Alfred Hitchcock coming out with his silhouette and then saying something morbid, then cutting to commercial, and then coming back to the episode. Yeah.
Would you say that silhouette was a Shamley silhouette, Brad?
Hey, I made your logo, so of course I do.
It took 17 episodes to get to this point, Brad. I'm clapping for myself.
So embarrassing.
Oh yeah, but what's with a little bit of history on this film, when first of all that theme that you are so always familiar with, which won't be appearing in this episode, you'll know why by the end. But it was the original theme is Charles Gounod's Funeral March of a Marionette. and it was suggested as the theme by Hitchcock's longtime musical composer Bernard Herrmann. And the episodes primarily began as Brad said, with a monologue, and then you move into the prime episode, and the key thing about Alfred Hitchcock Presents is that it's an anthology series, and this is something that has become a little bit more popular today through the means of Netflix and also things created by Ryan Murphy, where he doesn't do it episode by episode, but each season of American Horror Story is essentially a different story. Even if they're tangentially connected to one another in different ways, they're essentially different stories. And Black Mirror, obviously, it kind of influenced a lot by The Twilight Zone, but you can't not draw a little bit of inspiration from something like Alfred Hitchcock Presents when it comes to any form of mystery story happening week by week where the stories are different. And for the episodes that I selected for you, I wanted to get two that Hitch directed because I figured that you should see what he also is able to do with television. And the first one we watched was none other than Revenge, which is the pilot episode, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and starring Vera Miles from The Wrong Man. This was her first interaction working with Hitchcock. This is how she ends up working with him down the line. Also starring Ralph Meeker. The episode primarily deals with a woman who lives with her husband at a trailer park, and she's essentially accosted while the husband is away at work, and the only identifying marks that she knows of the man is that he was tall and dark and wore a gray suit. And so she's basically incoherent and just very, very despondent because of the events. And as they're driving into town one day to see if they can locate the person, she points one of the people out who is in a gray suit, tall and dark. The husband pulls over, goes and kills him, comes back out, gets in the car with her. And then as they're driving along, she says, "There he is, that's him." And so the reveal is that she's so despondent, she's associating anybody on the street with the person that attacked her. So I guess I want to ask for your impression of this episode. So you've seen Hitchcock cinematically through 4 different films. Did you find this episode of older TV to be a little bit more compelling or even like different than any other episode of TV you might say from like The Twilight Zone, if anything you've watched from that Nick at Night era?
No, my like right away. I don't know. This whole episode, again, I called it from like the beginning of like where it was going to go, and I couldn't tell if it was because maybe you saw it as a kid, subconsciously you know where it's going, but like especially once she points out the first guy, I was like, okay, I see where their story is going to be. He's going to injure the wrong guy, and then like the button on the story is going to be that she's just accusing everybody. But by the way, before I forget, Vera Miles looks so much like Jenna Malone. I had to look it up and see if they were related, and so far it's a no.
Yeah, no.
But
keep digging. Go to Ancestry.com. You'll find out that info.
But yeah, like the opening scene, like their whole relationship together wasn't like I got fixated on him constantly saying, "Well, I can't stay. I have to go to work," and then he kept distracting himself and slowing his like trajectory to work down. Like
he's just like, "Well, I don't really have to go today. You know, there might be a quarantine."
Like she wants him to stay in the bedroom. And then he's like, "No, I gotta go." And then he goes and like has a whole breakfast thing. And then she's trying to talk to him. And then he's like, "No, sorry, I gotta go." And then he stops and talks to the neighbor because he's in such a hurry.
Yeah.
So I was just sitting there thinking like, this seems really sloppy for someone who's supposed to be as meticulous as Hitchcock. So
what's interesting about that, the fact that to me, because the thing that I notice whenever I watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents is that I always have to lower my expectations on the visual spectrum. I stand by the fact that I believe that this and The Twilight Zone to me are the best shot television series of their time. This even goes beyond something like Star Trek, because as innovative as Star Trek is, there's also things about it that are more stagey. But it's still a show that innovates camera movement. And this one in particular, it's interesting that because they are 30-minute television episodes, Hitchcock's not getting the same budget as he would for a film. So for what he has to work with...
Yeah, I thought it still felt very similar to the movies. Again, in that time, special effects and set construction aren't very elaborate.
Yeah.
But they have like B-roll of stuff that's not on a stage, when they come and go from place to place. And then the driving scene is much like they did in movies with the rear projection. So
well, and that's not even just an old Hollywood technique. That's also a Hitchcock trope. Hitchcock used a lot of rear projection, and he used it mainly to control the elements around him. Hitchcock did not like working on location. He did not like doing anything really outside the studio if he could get away with it. And those process shots are brought all the way into his final film, Family Plot, where by the time you get to that film, they are very unconvincing by the standards of the era that he's filming in. With this particular story, what I appreciate primarily about it is that it's not reaching for any humorous heights like the other one we'll talk about, although both have their merits in their own way. But this one kind of lands on it ends on not an ambiguous note, but like a dreadful note, like a truly dreadful note. Like,
yeah,
this guy just committed murder, and now he's realizing
for the wrong
that
reason.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there was no reason for him to do it. And the only thing that brings any levity out of it is Hitchcock going like, well, it wasn't that fucking special. What did you think of the opening on this particular one? Since this is the first episode where he's just kind of like going like, here's what this shit's gonna be. You're gonna fucking deal with it.
Oh, like his actual intro?
Yeah, he's just like, I will not. He's just basically explaining what the show's gonna be for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I didn't realize this was the pilot until you said it.
Yeah.
Which again reinforces my feelings about the whole episode in general. It did feel like a pilot where they threw something together.
Yeah.
Because like the other frustrating thing about the whole construction of this story is, you've only got 30 minutes, probably actually more like 25, to tell this story, and I'd say 15 minutes are the setup in her waking up in the trailer and them having breakfast and then him going to work. And the one part where the neighbor comes over and talks to her while she's sunbathing and like hangs on a shot of her legs the whole time.
Yeah.
It feels like a setup to something with the neighbor, but it's just misdirection because she doesn't figure into it at all. In fact, she totally betrays him by not doing what he asked her to do and watch her the whole time. So
yeah,
I thought it would have been stronger if they brought her back as like somehow involved in what went down, because I thought like maybe she was attracted to her.
Yeah, it's funny because when I saw that this episode for the first time, my impression of this is like, she's going to be important to this story, right? And then she's not.
Yeah.
And so within that, it does have the pilot feel to it. I'm enamored by the back half of it. The beginning half with the setup, I feel like it doesn't lead to anything by comparison. So it's like, if nothing else, it's a good presentation to a network of like, well, we could tell a suspenseful story in 30 minutes or something of the Alfred Hitchcock nature, something that if you drew it out to 2 hours would be a Hitchcock movie, which I could see this being a Hitchcock movie that he would have made, and probably would have been the most eternally fascinating one of them all, especially considering the ending we get. What's interesting about it, and I find is that this is the early days of television, much like the early days of cinema, where until the production code and the Hays Code come around, cinema was able to get away with a lot more stuff than you'd imagine. Whether it was, sexuality content or violent content, television had a Wild Wild West vibe to it in its own way. And in this particular one, you'll notice, and in the second one that we're going to discuss, they don't end happily. Nobody wins at the end. There's no higher moral victory. So
that's something I remember from the series. Like as a kid was that they all had some kind of downer ending.
Yeah. Which, you also see carried over into something like Twilight Zone, where Twilight Zone, its bread and butter is, bet you didn't see that coming, and oh, isn't that depressing?
Yeah, as it should be. I feel like for this type of series, you should feel uneasy after watching it.
Exactly. Well, and especially if you're, getting introductions by Hitchcock, it's got to complete that motif. It's just like, look, I'm droll and funny, and I'm going to give you something droll and sad.
Yeah, you're not tuning in for happy endings. You're looking for twisted tales.
No. Watch the Jack Benny program for a happy ending. That's a fun show. Fun show. Jack Benny. What a comedian. Anyway, so a couple seasons in, we get the episode that I think is considered amongst fans of the show and of Alfred Hitchcock in general to be the peak of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, which is Lamb to the Slaughter, from 1958, from season 3, episode 28, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The writer of this story and teleplay is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory's Roald Dahl.
Yeah, that was did not see that coming.
Well, here's the thing.
But I get it.
Yeah, exactly, because as soon as you think Roald Dahl, you think children's author. And then you think Roald Dahl again, and you go, oh, terrifying children's author.
Yeah, the children's author who hated children.
Yeah, exactly. And amongst other things, in Roald Dahl's cinematic history, one thing that is noted is that he helped create what would become Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and among the additions that was stuck into that film was the Child Snatcher, which is a terrifying character if you ever watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But Roald Dahl also, obviously, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, a bunch of kids are punished because they don't listen to Willy Wonka's instructions, or in The Witches where they're all turned into mice, the BFG with a lot of chaos going on. So this sort of story, in the span of 30 minutes, we get ostensibly like a good murder story with a concise, it's kind of like the setup of a joke. You tell the beginning of the joke, which is the murder. You have the midpoint of the joke, which is her trying to hide the evidence and hide the fact that she killed her husband with this lamb chop. And then the punchline is that these cops are eating that lamb chop, that lamb, and going like the murder weapon's probably right under our noses is one of the lines in this story. And the wife starts to giggle because she knows what's been done. So,
yeah, for both these episodes, it's painfully apparent that the second halves of each of them, that's the idea that was in the writer's room. The first one is, what if there was a husband and his wife just started accusing guys of abusing her, and he took out the wrong guy? And then the second one is, what if the wife killed her husband with the lamb chop?
Yeah.
And how do we get there?
Yeah.
And I think that's the weakest part is that of each of those episodes, how did we get there? Whereas the punchline is, what drew them to making the episode.
Would you say that the setup for this one is a little stronger than the first one? Because I think that the setup for Lamb to the Slaughter is much better than the setup for Revenge.
A little bit, but not much. The husband is very... I don't know. I feel like that whole argument could have been more interesting.
Yeah, it's a little more basic. I mean, and obviously we have evolved in an era where domestic squabbles are much more elaborate, and sometimes they're close to 2.5 hours with Adam Driver yelling at Scarlett Johansson. So
yeah, just a police officer, taking an exhausted police officer coming home and getting himself like an alcoholic drink, and then just proclaiming like, "I'm leaving you."
Yeah. What I appreciated about it in terms of it being stronger than the setup to Revenge is that it's toying with a lot more progressive or groundbreaking material than the Revenge one is. Like the Revenge one's a setup that you could easily see coming a mile away. This one's a little bit more detailed. The argument is basic, but there's details in it. And what's interesting about this one is that it primarily takes place in one location. It's not like Revenge where there's multiple locations. And so this one in particular has the unenviable task of being interestingly shot in a one-room location. And I'd have to say, if we're going between the two, I think this one is obviously much more well shot because of the limitations it's working in. Which is
the house has like the kitchen and the garage attachments, so it's able to break out of the one room a little bit more.
Yeah.
Than the trailer does.
Yeah, exactly. Because the trailer is a lot more confining, and this one, but this one also has, it's not going out on streets or anything like that. So it's primarily focused in that kitchen, and the visuals are able to kind of draw out the suspense in a way that not every episode of this show tends to do. Obviously, not all of these episodes are directed by Alfred Hitchcock. If anything, this was actually a training ground kind of a show for other directors. Amongst the people who would direct episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents are Robert Stevens, Paul Henreid, Herschel Daughtry, Norman Lloyd doing it. Alfred Hitchcock himself did 17 episodes. Arthur Hiller, James Nielsen, Justice Addis, John Bram, and notable directors such as Robert Altman, Ida Lupino, Stuart Rosenberg, Robert Stevenson, David Swift, and William Friedkin. William Friedkin, by the way, directed the last episode of this show. So this was not just a Hitchcock playground. This was a place where other people could, stretch their directorial muscles and legs.
It's like how SNL breeds comedy.
Exactly. Yes.
Personalities. Yeah.
Very much so. And other anthology shows had that similar training ground aesthetic. Steven Spielberg, one of his first directing gigs is for an anthology show that had Betty Davis in that particular episode. So a lot of people benefited from that early experience, especially within the Universal lot and whatnot. And this show, primarily, Hitchcock does it it's a money machine for him. He's able to make a lot of money off of this and then start gaining a lot more control. The ultimate control he gets between this television show and his movie career is after Psycho becomes a hit, and he reaps most of the profits because Paramount decided that they weren't going to have any ownership in Psycho for fear of any recompense from releasing something like Psycho at that time. So Hitchcock financed it himself, reaped all the financial rewards. So between this and the show, he becomes immensely powerful. And these monologues were that he becomes so famous for. And really, I think, when you think of Alfred Hitchcock, if you're like you and don't have a reference for his cinema, you know him as a guy who introduces a TV show primarily.
I was aware of the show, but I clearly understood that his filmography was what he's best known for.
Right. But that legendary showman status, it's one of the obvious traits about his personality that we think of when we think of Hitchcock today. We think the movies he made, and we think of those intros. Those are like the two big things that pop out in your head. I'm actually
learning more about how, because of those intros, I always assumed he was a cult, creepy director, but apparently he was much more of a avant-garde director. He didn't direct his movies like a lot of people in this system. He was kind of more laid back and he knew what he wanted, but he wasn't getting on anyone's case about specifics.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a duality to that, because there's the notion that because his camera is absolute, his actors are able to do whatever they want in it so long as they are adherent to the camera and what its function's going to be, not just in that scene they're in, but in the next shot or the next frame or the next take. So there's that, but also he is much more experimental. Hitchcock is a director that was not afraid to step outside the boundaries. Amongst the films that get that is that he, in Spellbound, which we'll talk about in a future episode, he's trying to work with Dali and using Salvador Dali type nightmare imagery, and unfortunately a lot of that got cut down to 2 minutes of footage in the final film. But he was not afraid to kind of go out there and beyond. Vertigo is a film that I think you'll visually appreciate because of how much it's doing with visuals. even The Wrong Man and I Confess are dealing with different visual schemes that you wouldn't see in a film of that era, especially The Wrong Man, I feel, because it's dealing with that experience of Henry Fonda in there. And when it comes to thematic content, as evidenced in Lamb to the Slaughter, which incidentally comes out 2 years before Alfred Hitchcock does something like Psycho, it's already setting the template of breaking the ground for flat-out homicide on screen in a way that has never been done before. Now, in the case of Lamb to the Slaughter, it's it's a leg of mutton that she bashes his head in with, and then it's served to the cops. But that is kind of a gateway point to then leading to, well, can I show somebody being stabbed on screen? And that's how you get something like Psycho, which then breeds arguably an entire genre. So he was not afraid to step outside those boundaries and really kind of get the audience's blood pumping and throw something in there that they wouldn't expect.
Yeah.
But as with anything that Hitchcock has done, eventually something runs its course, whether it's his film career and his ability to work within the studio system. For Alfred Hitchcock Presents, it eventually ran its course, and it continues to be popular in television syndication, but this is as Hitchcock is getting older. Demands on him don't require that he focus his energy solely on the movies. But this film had a revival in 1985, and it was colorized footage of Hitchcock from the original series to introduce the segments, and it was a big hit, and it debuted in the fall of 1985, but it only lasted one season before NBC canceled it, and it was produced for 3 more years by USA Network. This version of Alfred Hitchcock, which is the presenter of these stories and introducing people to macabre tales, gets kind of offshooted into other media as well. When we think of Alfred Hitchcock and that imagery of the silhouette and whatnot, it's plastered all over the place. He did in 1962, Golden Records released an album of 6 ghost stories titled Alfred Hitchcock Presents Ghost Stories for Young People. It's just mainly one of many things that Alfred Hitchcock stuck his name on. Now, he introduces each of these stories and then, does a little joke here and there. And then the ghost stories are told by an actor named John Allen. So this is like an instance where Hitchcock can make a tidy buck off of putting his name on something. Branding, that image branding, is something we don't see really become prevalent until you can slap Star Wars on anything and sell it for a hefty price. So Hitchcock's kind of a forefront in that methodology of advertising, merchandising, that thing that, Mel Brooks makes fun of in Spaceballs. And the show goes on to influence other stories, not the least of which is that there's an episode of the show from 1960 called Man from the South, which features Steve McQueen and Peter Lorre. The story involved with that is that a man bets his finger, his entire finger, that he can start his cigarette lighter 10 times in a row, and he makes this bet with a man from the South who likes to gamble heavily. This particular episode will also be remade with John Huston playing the gambler and Danny Huston, his son, playing the guy who agrees to the bet. This story would then be later adapted by none other than Quentin Tarantino for his segment in the anthology film 4 Rooms, and his segment, he changed it from Man from the South to Man from Hollywood. Now, Quentin Tarantino gets a lot of flack for ripping off other people. I'd say the only time it's incredibly obvious, or absolutely flat out, it is taking from something else, it is for 4 Rooms, because he doesn't even try to hide the plot or the title from it. The difference is that Bruce Willis is in the background in his segment. This show had an immense amount of popularity over time and cemented Hitchcock's legacy. And that's going to do it for this episode, Brad. So I've basically taken you on the Hitchcock journey Does it compel you to watch any more Hitchcock films?
Sort of.
I tried.
I want to see his other films, but it's not like, oh, I got to do this tomorrow. Yeah, I'll get around to it.
Brad, you're in quarantine. You can do whatever you want.
It sounds like Vertigo. Like, I'm interested to see the visual style of it.
Yeah.
And then apparently Rope I should have checked out a while ago because of the way it's made.
Well, are you sure that's the only reason you should have watched it, Brad? Not one actor in particular? Not going to mention his name, but it's me, Jimmy Stewart.
I saw you in Five Goes West. I got it.
Oh yeah. My wonderful portrayal of Wyatt Burp. I got into character for that one. I ran around on all fours for an entire week to get into character for that one.
I'm sure you did, old man. So like I said, I respect his place in film history, cinema history.
Yeah. But and it was not to put you on the spot to have you on this episode. If anything, primarily why I wanted you on was to introduce you to some Hitchcock films that you might not even give a second thought to watch, but also to bring you into the fold on this because you now complete the cycle of the group of people who openly welcomed me into your group to podcast week after week. And I only wanted to, the only way I could ever think of repaying that on a tangible level within a show context is to have you all on board to talk about it in some form or fashion. So,
I'm honored to be asked to do it. I just hope I didn't make the worst episode ever, but
we'll see. We'll see, Brad. We'll see.
Yeah, it might be. I bet like all the Hitchcock fans are just pulling their hair out listening to me.
Yeah.
I think also the hesitancy to like watch his films is like I said earlier, I feel like a lot of film students really ape his material pretty closely, and I kind of feel like me having not seen his stuff, I'm immune to that. So like it makes me feel like I can be more of an original filmmaker if I don't, study his work. So
it's funny that you bring that up because in the last episode, Marshall and I talked about how essentially Hitchcock's failures or where he, steps out of line are important for people in the here and now to take note of. Is like even if somebody who is regarded as a master makes a mistake here and there. What's interesting, you're bringing up kind of the inverse of that, which is just like, wow, he's setting a template that other filmmakers follow. So if anything, it motivates you to try to think outside the box, which in a way, Brad, is something Hitchcock would encourage you to do.
Exactly. I'm following his other template.
Yeah, even though I kind of stayed in my same box for the last couple of films. But I broke ground, Brad. I broke ground. You have no idea how much...
you stayed in the same box since he died and he's in a coffin somewhere.
Oh, you did a good... That was a good... We got to get you on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Do you have a DeLorean? Do you have a thing that'll help you travel back in time, Brad? We'd get you on the show. You can be I'll do that Steve McQueen thing all over again. You can be Steve McQueen. Fuck Steve McQueen.
My episode's the director who died like 40 years ago.
Hey, this is about me, isn't it? But that's going to do it for the Shamley Silhouette this week. You can find more episodes of the Shamley Silhouette at realnerdspodcast.com, where Brad dutifully puts this show up once it's finished.
Whenever I get around to it.
Yeah. And we're going to be seeing the episodes coming out a little bit more frequently via the website first and then on the feed down the line. And we'll work our way towards the final episode with our guest Adam Roach from Secret History of Hollywood. We're going to tease that because it's a fun reveal. But until next time, good night.